Now that Halloween Ends is out, let's re-rank the Halloween franchise and determine once and for all what the worst sequel is. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and this is the channel where I get to talk about all my favorite horror movies. This is actually the second ranking I'm doing of the franchise. The last one I did was between Halloween 2018 and Kills. It was in 2020 when I actually made that video, and if you need a little refresher, my previous ranking was from worst to best: Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, Halloween Resurrection, Rob Zombie's Halloween, Halloween 5, Halloween 6, H2O, Halloween 3, Halloween 2, Halloween 4, Halloween 2018, and the the immortal classic Halloween 1978 at the top. And I'll just spoil it now, that one will always be at the top. It will never be topped. It's been 2 whole years since I made that video though, and my list has changed quite a bit, so we're just gonna jump into it with the worst Halloween sequel of them all, Halloween Resurrection. I don't know what I was thinking back in 2020 not putting this at the bottom of my list. Like, it should go under the bottom of the list. It's not even deserving of a spot on the list in my opinion, but since then I've seen it a few times doing collabs with CZsWorld. I had to watch it for a video there, and I've also watched it a couple times on AMC Fear Fest, and I'm like 100% positive this is the worst Halloween sequel. There are only a couple redeeming qualities in the entire thing for me. The first one being the near perfect replica of the Myers house, except it's abandoned and dilapidated. It's a cool setting as well for this movie. It's just like the story, the acting, the Michael Myers costume, a lot of the kills, the pacing, the editing, everything else is just kind of like a huge mess. But the Myers house looks really good in this movie, especially when you compare it to the last time we saw the Myers house, which was Halloween 5. And in that movie, I don't even know why they called it the Myers house. It was such a weird move. They didn't even try to look for one that looked similar to the one in Halloween. It didn't work out all that well. And knowing how rushed the franchise gets between Halloween 5 and Halloween Resurrection, it's nice to see a little bit of attention to detail here in that regard. Also, I like the Katie Sackhoff decapitation scene. It's obviously rushed, it's messy, it doesn't look great, but that was kind of new for the franchise, and I just like watching her head bounce down the stairs. It's a horribly done practical effect, but at least it's practical, and yeah, I think that's like one of the better parts of the movie. And as someone who makes their money on YouTube, I gotta give it 1 bonus point for its plot, where you're putting people inside the Myers house on Halloween night and having them live stream their experience. That really could have been a marketing opportunity for Halloween Kills with that awesome Myers house they built on a soundstage. Like, honestly, a bit of a missed opportunity there for Universal and Blumhouse, but I'm digressing a little bit. Overall, I just think this movie is a mess. I'm already prepared for how mad people are going to be with how low I have H2O on this list, but I gotta say, that ending is really good and it's really impactful, and having a movie like this follow it up by killing Laurie right at the beginning, kind of retconning that ending by making it look like she didn't actually kill Michael Myers, I don't know. I don't think they earned that in any way, and the movie that follows that intro scene is so bad that the extra didn't earn it. It just like didn't need to work out the way that it did. All of this is to say, I get why they rebooted the franchise after Resurrection, because this is a movie you really can't come back from. Halloween 5 has made its way down to second worst on my list, and look, this one was conflicting to me because there is a lot of stuff I like in Halloween 5, and it also has that nostalgic feel for me because, like with Halloween 4, I was the same age as Jamie is supposed to be in this movie when I saw it, and having that lens of a character my age to look through made me like ignore a lot of the issues with this movie. But obviously I'm 29 now, and it's harder and harder to ignore them every time I watch it. I will say it is cool seeing Michael Myers kill someone with a scythe, and the lighting in that specific scene doesn't make the mask look as bad as it is, and I love the shot of the blood going across the hay. I think all of that works really well in this movie. It's honestly probably the high point of this entire film. And this movie did come out right at the end of the 80s, so it still has that grainy look and feel to it. It still feels like an 80s movie, and it gives me that nostalgia for the time I never lived in, which is why I love so many of the horror movies from the 80s. I grew up watching them on AMC Fear Fest, but now when I see this movie playing during their Halloween marathon, for the first year, I really just go look for something else to watch, and that's never really happened before. So yeah, there's really just a mountain of stuff in this movie to criticize, and it gets harder and harder to ignore as time goes on, and all of it really centers on Michael Myers. For some reason, H5 put a huge concerted effort into humanizing this character, which is the complete opposite of the idea for Michael Myers or the shape as a character. He's supposed to be the absence of characters. So like having a movie where he takes off his mask and shows his face to Jamie and then starts crying, like, look, I get it. Guys cry. I'm fine with that happening in movies. I just have an issue with Michael Myers crying on screen. It just doesn't work, and it doesn't feel like Michael Myers, and the mask isn't doing him any favors. It's just so far off from what Michael Myers' mask is supposed to look like that I really don't know how to criticize it. It almost feels like they did it on purpose. They probably did it on purpose, right? Obviously, the mask in Halloween 4 isn't anything to write home about, but this came out 1 year after Halloween 4, so to have a mask that's not even consistent with the one that came before it, that's what I would have preferred, and I just don't get how they decided that was going to be okay. Ripping on Tina is kind of played out at this point. I never really had a problem with that character, and honestly, she could be the best written and best performed character in the history of film, and I don't think she'd be able to carry the weight that's left by killing off Rachel at the beginning of this movie. Like, there's so much character work put into building up Rachel in Halloween 4, and they just piss it all away right at the beginning of this movie, and the death scene isn't even cool. And when you throw in all the half-baked ideas that this movie has, like the psychic link between Jamie and Michael, the admittedly rad thorn tattoo on his wrist, and whatever's going on with the man in black, it really goes to show that this movie didn't have a lot of reason to exist outside of the fact that Halloween 4 made a ton of money and they had to throw it together and capitalize on that newfound success. Next up is Rob Zombie's Halloween from 2007, and this one's staying in the exact same spot as it was on my other list. I kind of feel bad ranking this movie so low because I am a huge Rob Zombie fan, whether it's House of a Thousand Corpses, Lords of Salem, The Devil's Rejects, of course the new Monsters movie, even to some extent 3 from Hell. I enjoy all of those movies. I really like his music. It's just this Halloween movie he made never really quite clicked with me, and the only reason I ever really tried to talk it up to my friends and convince myself to like it is that it's the first Halloween movie I got to see in theaters, which, you know, really does still mean something to me. But as time goes on and I get farther and farther away from seeing it in the movie theater on opening night at a dingy theater because I did have to sneak in, the more its flaws start to show themselves to me. It's another one like Halloween 5. In my last ranking, I pointed out that the intro is just a short film version of every other Rob Zombie movie. You've got a bunch of white trash characters sitting in a kitchen screaming swear words at each other. They're all overacting. It just doesn't feel realistic, even for the type of characters he's trying to portray. I think he's done it better in his other movies like House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. I definitely understand the intent of showing us the downfall of like a totally normal kid into the brutal serial killer that we have at the end of the movie, because at that point there had already been so many Halloween sequels and you're going back and remaking the original movie. So I see what Rob Zombie was doing by exploring something new. I just didn't really need to see that part of the story explained. It just doesn't really do anything for me. Also, I've explained this before, but I really dislike the brother-sister plotline. It doesn't make Michael scary to me because he's only going after Laurie Strode or people who are related to her. So if I'm not friends with her or in her orbit or in the town of Haddonfield on Halloween night, Michael Myers is not going to kill me. So yeah, I just don't like that brother-sister plotline, and the fact that in this movie, which is a reboot, a remake where they could go with whatever they wanted, they kind of just stick to the same plot points as the original. And look, Rob Zombie had a tough time working with the studios when he made Halloween and Halloween 2. Like, he wasn't even going to come back for Halloween 2, and he did it. I'm not even going to pretend like this is the worst thing ever. I just think he's made 2 better Halloween movies with House of a Thousand Corpses and The Lords of Salem. So if you're giving me the option between his remake of Halloween and those 2 movies, I'm just going to go with those 2 every other time. Next up is Halloween 6, both cuts of them, just because even though they are different, I feel largely the same about both versions of this movie. And this one's a fun one to look at because it is so wildly different from Halloween 4 and 5, but it still manages to make Halloween 5's biggest mistake, which is killing off one of the franchise's most likable characters right at the beginning of the movie. I know she dies in a different spot if you're watching one of the cuts, but I don't really care. It's like they still kill her off too early, and they didn't even get Danielle Harris back to play Jamie, which I feel like was a huge mistake. The super messy story in this movie is frustrating because there are a lot of pieces of it that I really like. Obviously, the fall atmosphere, a lot of the lighting, the fact that you get that Halloween feel that you don't get from a lot of the movies in this franchise, the outdoor party hosted by the radio station on Halloween night, like that's one of the most Midwest things ever. So I love all of that stuff in this movie. I also think the Myers costume is really cool in this movie. It obviously had a big gap between Halloween 5 and 6, so the change between the masks doesn't bother me as much as it did between 4 and 5. And this mask looks like a more modernized or like late 90s version of the original Michael Myers mask. It's close enough where it wouldn't bother me if that movie came out and I went to see it at the theater. And I think George P. Wilbur coming back from Halloween 4 was a cool little touch. I think he's a pretty solid Michael Michael Myers, and seeing him use a fire axe will never get old to me. I love that kill. Sometimes I just look it up on YouTube. And one big plus is that depending on the cut, you do get to see the biggest dickhead in the entire franchise of Halloween have his head exploded. And that is another kill I love looking up on YouTube. The big issue with this movie, like I mentioned, is the super messy story. I think it's cool that they brought back Donald Pleasence. This was his last movie, and unfortunately they did go back to do reshoots for the ending, but they couldn't use Donald Pleasence because he unfortunately passed away between the movie wrapping production and them going back to do reshoots. And yeah, it just feels like a really not so great ending to his incredible legacy throughout this franchise. Like, Dr. Loomis is one of my favorite characters in any horror franchise ever, and to see him go out in a movie like this, it just bums me out when I think about it. The next movie on my list is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, the director's cut, and this one's actually moved its way up, obviously from the bottom of the list to still the bottom half, but much higher in the bottom half of my list. And for that, I have to thank the dickheads on Twitter who thought they were complimenting Rob Zombie by saying he no longer has the worst Halloween movie. So I thought about it for a sec. I was like, was I being a little harsh in my last ranking? I went back and watched my original review of this back in 2018, and I remembered that the director's cut is so much better. It adds in all of the context that the theatrical cut story is missing, and it also adds in a really cool shot during Laurie's dream sequence where she has to crawl over a pile of bodies. Obviously, I don't like how much you see Michael Myers' face in this. It doesn't even feel like Michael by the time he actually shows up back in Haddonfield, and I'll just never get over the fact that he talks at the end of this movie. This is a weird one because you could still definitely make a case that it's not a great Halloween sequel and that it's just a good slasher movie all on its own, but I like a lot of the ideas in it, and after sitting down and analyzing it for my video in 2018 and watching the director's cut recently, I think that director's cut really makes it bump up my list quite a few spaces. I feel really good about where this movie is on the list overall. I would also definitely say if you haven't seen this movie in a while, it's worth checking out. Just make sure, again, it's the director's cut. Next up is Halloween H2O, and look, I understand that not all of you were as unlucky as I was to have Halloween 2007 be your first movie in theaters, and this one was, and you got a satisfying ending with it, so it ranks very high on your list. I totally understand that. But unfortunately, I don't have that nostalgia because I didn't see this movie till later in my life, and when I saw it, it was during a Halloween marathon, so I watched it with Resurrection back to back. I didn't even get those 4 years of bliss where I thought Laurie decapitated Michael at the end of the movie. Like, if I'm being real, I didn't even know this movie existed until I saw James Rolfe's Monster Madness review, which I highly recommend you check out all of his Halloween reviews because they're great. I don't like any of the various masks Michael wears in this movie. I really don't like the CGI one. I also don't like that it takes place in California, and I really don't like that weird wrestling move Michael does where he lowers himself down from the ceiling. He's like holding onto a pipe or something with one hand. That doesn't work for me at all. So hopefully with all that context, you can see that for me personally, in my opinion, this one ranks in the middle of the list, or just one space below the middle. We have 13 movies now, so there is a middle. I do think it's rad that Laurie Strode gets to decapitate Michael Myers with a fire axe, and Josh Hartnett playing her kid, John Tate, is awesome, to the point where I would have liked to see more movies with him at the center of the story. Like, maybe Michael gets resurrected and comes after him in the future versus what we got in Halloween Resurrection. That honestly would have been pretty cool. I also got to point out that in this movie, Nurse Marion is both written and treated a lot better than she is in Halloween Kills. Look, I get that she dies in both movies, but the intro to this, where you get to see that she was working with Loomis over the years before Michael comes back to go out and find Laurie, I think that works super well, and that has a great fall atmosphere that I am definitely missing throughout the rest of this film. So yeah, I want to point out that her death in this is definitely more like respectful, well-written, good overall. I just think it's worth mentioning. The dead center middle pick on my list is the original Halloween 2, which has technically moved down a spot mainly because we're 4 years out from Halloween 2018, and just like I predicted, that movie has sort of replaced this one in my rotation. Like, before Halloween 2018, I would always watch Halloween and Halloween 2 back to back, but now every year when I put on the original Halloween, I find myself just wanting to go right into Halloween 2018. Call it recency bias, call it whatever you want. I just personally think that's a better movie. I will point out though that if you are comparing the Haddonfield Memorial Hospital setting in Halloween Kills to the setting in this one, I mean, it's not even a competition. The dark hallways, the lack of patients and nurses in Halloween 2, it all gives it that small town feel that I think really makes this movie excel. And then when you look at the hospital in Halloween Kills, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. The one big reason this dropped for me is that for every cool moment you have, like Michael's death scene where he's exploded by Dr. Loomis who goes out with him, or the needle kill, or the fact that Michael writes Sam Hain on the chalkboard at the school. I know it's Samhain, but Loomis says Samhain, so I'm gonna say Samhain. It has something not so great, like the total nonsensical death of Ben Tramer or the brother-sister plotline. The ranking of Halloween 2 is obviously up to personal preference, and I totally understand why so many people rank it higher on their list than I would, but I also see a lot of people who like to criticize it for being so different from the original movie, so that's why, for me, I feel like it's settling perfectly right in the dead center of the franchise. Halloween 2 went down a spot on my list, and Halloween 3 has worked its way up a spot because they swapped. You can ask anyone who's known me since I was a little kid, and they will tell you that I have been a legitimate Halloween 3 defender ever since I saw it way too young at the age of like 7 or 8. But between the many Scream Factory Blu-rays and DVDs, the Trick or Treat Studios masks, the kids in David Gordon Green's first 2 movies, Halloween 2018 and Kills, that have the Silver Shamrock masks on, and then of course the intro credits for Halloween Ends being just directly lifted from Halloween 3, I think it has reached its point where it's at the mainstream level now. The real reason I wanted to bump this one up a spot is because I recently got to see it at the Alamo Drafthouse, and I was shocked that after watching it like 50 times probably over my entire life, it sucked me in seeing it on the big screen like I had never seen it before. There's so much great camera work, acting, the soundtrack is obviously awesome. I love that it pulls in the idea of Halloween as like a pagan holiday, and like how Cochran plays this amazing joke, this amazing, terrible practical joke on pretty much the entire continent of North America. It's really damn awesome, and I think that's why people are starting to come around on it, because when you get farther away from when a movie releases and you can kind of take it on its own merits, you start to appreciate it more if it is actually a good movie. There are barely any kills in this movie, but they all stand out to me like just off the top of my head. I love that nose bridge crack. It's disgusting. The guy pouring gas on himself and lighting himself on fire and blowing up, even though he's a robot, that scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Of course, Marge blasting herself in the face with a laser, and then cockroaches and like crickets crawling out of her mouth. It's disgusting. And then finally topping it all off with the kid having his head disintegrated and turning into snakes and scorpions. They're very memorable kills, so it's definitely a less is more scenario. And to top it all off, it does a great job of planting the idea in your head of what will happen if Dr. Chalice fails, which gives it incredible stakes. Next up is a Halloween sequel that really holds a special place in my heart. It's Halloween 4. This is the first one I reviewed here on the channel. I couldn't tell you why I started with Halloween 4, but I was just starting out with these news updates, and I wanted to see if people would watch a review of the Halloween movies from me, and you guys turned out and watched it like way more than I expected. That's like one of my favorite videos I've ever made. And this is one of my favorite movies ever made. I would love to see this movie in theaters. My excitement when I watch Halloween 4 comes from that best in franchise intro where you see the cold farmland early in the morning that's decorated with all of these homemade Halloween decorations. I mean, it inspired my buddy Mike Bailiff, who has a channel called Witching Season, and he has a film company called Witching Season Films. He has so many cool videos where it's just the ambiance of Halloween 4, and I never would have found his channel without this movie's perfect intro. And it only ramps up from there. We get to see a super rainy night when Michael's being transferred to a different asylum. I love the bandage mask he's wearing, and after seeing the mask in Halloween 4 and 5, I wish he just kept those bandages because it looks so damn cool, and I would love to have one of those like foam heads with the bandages wrapped around like they are in Halloween 4. Dwight H. Little knew he really had to nail it for a 10 years later sequel, and in my opinion, he absolutely got the job done. I mean, the kill where Michael throws a guy in an electric transformer or shoves his head through a dude's forehead, those are super memorable moments, and all of it is carried by two of my favorite heroines in the entire series, Jamie Lloyd and Rachel Carruthers. I was not able to say that name in other videos. Rachel's growth from reluctant babysitter to true sister is awesome to watch, and man, I was tricked the first time I saw this on AMC Fear Fest. I was a little kid, and when she fell off the roof, and I literally thought she was dead. So when she came back, it was so cool. And like I already mentioned, I was pretty young when I saw this, so it was easy to see myself in Jamie, which made this movie so much scarier. Man, if you haven't watched Halloween 4 this year, what are you doing? Make sure you check this one out before Halloween. I'm sure you noticed at this point that I haven't talked about David Gordon Green's trilogy yet, and now we're about to because we only have 4 movies left. In my 4th spot, out of the David Gordon Green trilogy, the bottom slot goes to Halloween Kills. And I'm gonna be real, I can't tell you how many times I moved this one up and down this top 4 slot because it has so much I love, but it also has a lot of stuff that bugs me. I know this movie's kind of divisive with the fan base, but I think we can all agree on the fact that Michael is the most brutal and coolest looking he's ever been on screen in Halloween Kills. I mean, the firefighter execution scene alone, where Michael escapes Laurie's burning house and murders all of the firefighters, that's like a top 3 moment in the entire franchise for me. And when you look at all the other kills in this movie, Christopher Nelson was firing on all cylinders. He actually wrote a great article about it in an issue of Fangoria. I want to say it was the Halloween Kills issue from last Halloween. You should definitely read that if you haven't. But what makes Halloween Kills stand out from the crowd is that nearly flawless flashback scene that perfectly transports us back to 1978 and shows us how Michael was apprehended. And we get to see that like flawless Loomis makeup, and they got the voice right. Like, I still, a whole year later, I've seen this movie so many times, I don't know how they did that. That was literally perfect looking Loomis. It makes me want a Halloween sequel set in that time period, or maybe even a little bit later, because they showed that they can take us back to that time period and do it really well. Also, of course, making the Myers house a central character in this movie was such a smart move from David Gordon Green. And thanks to clout chasers and a big delay, the kill script leaked pretty early, so I knew a lot of what was going to happen just from my comment section. And also, way before that even happened, someone in Salem, Massachusetts, like called me over and showed me a video on their phone of the whole film set where they had the Myers house built. And I saw some like iPhone footage of the flashback scene being filmed, and even knowing about it for as long as I did, it still lived up to my hype when I got to see it in theaters on the first night this movie came out. Despite the goofiness at the hospital and the fact that they bring back so many legacy characters only to kill them, which makes it feel like a theme park ride, there's a lot of cool plot set up for Halloween Ends here between Willie the Kid's radio station, the radio tower itself, Michael just wanting to go home and stare out his window. There's so many things. I don't want to get too into it because I'll probably do a deep dive video one day on this, but yeah, I like Halloween Kills a lot, and I think it's one of the better Halloween sequels. Look guys, I am well prepared for the shit I'm about to catch for this, but Halloween Ends is number 3 on my list. Just like with Halloween Kills, I struggled a little bit on where this movie was going to rank, but just like with Halloween Kills, it wasn't swaying plus or minus like one spot on the list. It was really switching places with Halloween Kills a lot once I realized I was going to put that movie above Halloween 4. I've seen this movie 5 times now, and unlike some people who say that they didn't like it the first time or hated it the first time, and then every subsequent watch made them like it more, I really enjoyed it the first time, and then every subsequent watch made me love it even more. Like, I really went from not being sure about it to having it be one of my favorite films in the franchise in the span of just a few weeks, which to me says it's a very good movie. I've talked about why I love this movie so much at this point between my spoiler-free review, my spoiler review, the podcast I did with Zach Myers, Spencer Charnas, and Ben Scrivens, which was awesome. You should definitely check it out. I'll link it down in the description. Regardless, taking this movie on its own and removing it from the marketing hype that was done by Universal, because overall, I think that was a big detriment to the reaction to this movie. It's literally one of the best studio horror movies I've ever seen in my entire life, and all of that comes down to the incredible writing, the incredible performances, the incredible shot work, and John Carpenter's best score since the original Halloween. I've seen a lot of the hyperbolic try-hard takes, like this is the worst movie I've ever seen, and I'm just not gonna engage with those. But the one I will push back on is people saying that this is going to become a cult classic. Cult classics are reserved for movies that like everyone hates, like critics hate, fans hate, whatever. This is a movie where half the fan base dislikes it. It's divisive because it's dividing the fan base in half, and it also has a better Rotten Tomato score from critics than Halloween Kills does. And I think right now, at the time of recording this, it's at like 42%. So this is not a cult classic. This is a misunderstood and mismarketed movie that I think as time goes on and people can see it on its own as its own film, they will really start to appreciate, much like with Halloween 3. But yeah, until that happens, I'll defend this movie tooth and nail because it's great. Remaining in the number 2 spot is Halloween 2018, and curiously, back in 2020 when I ranked these movies, there were a lot of people making it their full-time job to hate on this movie, but suddenly here we are in 2022 and all of those people seem to have disappeared. Nearly everything about this movie, whether you're looking at it on its own or as a 40 years later sequel, works excellently, but the standout moments for me that I'll never forget are getting to see that one take where Michael Myers swims through the streets of Haddonfield like a shark on Halloween night and has some of the coolest kills he's had in the entire franchise. And of course, when he takes his hand and drops the teeth over the bathroom stall, that's the first thing I heard about Halloween 2018 when they showed footage at CinemaCon. I'm never gonna forget that. It's just such a cool scene. It lived up to my immeasurable hype after hearing about it and then getting to see it on the big screen. And I gotta give a bonus shout out to the Elrod's backyard, where Oscar is stalked by Michael, who's using a motion light in a really cool and clever way, and then he picks up Oscar and stabs his face through a wrought iron fence. That was an it's just such a good kill. And while I do have some gripes, like Allison not really knowing her way around her grandma's backyard during the whole ending sequence of the movie, and of course Sartain just like as a concept, all of my gripes are minor, and I don't think they detract from this movie as a whole. Having all the awesome stuff I just talked about and the coolest Michael Myers since the original at the time that this one released as the cherry on top, it all just really feels like a fever dream at this point, but it actually happened and it rules. But even if you took all of that awesomeness away from it, it would still be, in my opinion, the best Halloween sequel. And like I told you at the beginning of this video, my #1 spot goes to Halloween, the immortal classic from 1978. And since after over 130 videos about this franchise, there's not a whole lot new I can say about this movie, I'm using its spot to just say thank you. I have made over 130 videos about the Halloween franchise over the past 4 years, and not a single one has failed to generate an awesome discussion between Halloween fans in the comments. Yes, even the one where I talked about Ben Tramer still being alive in Halloween 2018. Even though we never got to see him on screen, we did get him name dropped by Hawkins in Halloween Kills, and I am happy with that. That is about as much as I would have wanted, especially with how many people came back for that movie. Whether you've been here from the beginning, you were here at the beginning, you went away and came back, or you just found my channel through all the Halloween Ends coverage, thank you so much for all the amazing opportunities. I think I've said this like 1,000 times at this point, but I will never forget how awesome the experience was leading up to Halloween 2018, leading up to Halloween Kills, and now leading up to Halloween Ends for literally the rest of my life. It's dumb, but I used to feel like I had to hide how much I loved these movies because no one ever really wanted to talk about them, and now I've got 50,000 people, over 50,000 people who would love to talk about Halloween no matter what time of year it is at the drop of a hat. And I wish I could go back and show little kid me who saw this movie way too early that was going to happen, because he would be stoked. Thankfully, I've been able to take everything I learned working on this channel and apply it to my other channels, which like it's bittersweet, but they are a lot more successful than this channel. So a lot of you have been asking if this is the end of this channel, like if I'm just going to move on and work on PS Ready and Deck Ready, and the answer to that is hell no. I mean, we were just hearing that Friday the 13th is coming back. I love that franchise. I know Nightmare's coming back, and soon enough Halloween will be back. So yeah, I'm going to work on some reviews, I'm going to work on some more rankings. I'm finally going to take some time and make the huge list of videos I've been making for 4 years that I never made because of all the amazing Halloween updates I was having so much fun making. And yes, I have been making a huge list. Every time I asked you guys to let me know what you wanted me to make, I wrote it down, I promise. So yeah, that's my updated Halloween ranking. Thanks for watching to the end if you did, and of course, as always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on and happy Halloween.